The sound of breaking glass shattered the night as Hazel Thompson cowered in the corner of the kitchen, her arms raised to shield herself from the whiskey bottle that had just exploded against the wall inches from her head. Her husband Thaddeus stood over her, his shadow looming in the dim lamplight of their modest homestead outside Willow Creek, Nevada. The year was 1873, and like the frontier town itself, Hazel's marriage had grown harsh and unforgiving with each passing season. "You think I don't see the way you look at other men," Thaddeus slurred, his voice rough from cheap whiskey and rage. 7 years married and still barren. "What good are you?" Hazel trembled, her honey-brown hair falling across her face as she tried to make herself smaller. At 26, she had spent nearly a quarter of her life beneath the weight of Thaddeus Thompson's growing cruelty. The gentle, ambitious man who had courted her had disappeared not long after their wedding, replaced by this bitter stranger whose fists spoke more often than his words. "Please, Thaddeus," she whispered, "I've been faithful, I swear it on my mother's grave." He grabbed her by the arm, yanking her to her feet. "Your swears mean nothing. Nothing." His breath was hot against her face as he raised his hand. "A man needs a proper wife, not some useless." The blow came swiftly, his ring catching her across the temple. Pain exploded behind her eyes as she fell back against the rough wooden floor. Something warm trickled down her face, and the world seemed to waver around her. The last thing Hazel saw before darkness took her was Thaddeus's boots stomping toward the door. When consciousness returned, the cabin was silent. Hazel tried to open her eyes but found only darkness greeting her. Panic seized her heart as she touched her face, feeling the crusted blood around her eyes. She blinked rapidly, frantically, but no light penetrated her vision. "Thaddeus," she called, her voice breaking in the empty house. No answer came. Fighting rising hysteria, Hazel crawled across the floor until she found the table leg, using it to pull herself upright. Her world had become a void, every familiar corner of her home now a mystery to be navigated by touch alone. Her fingers trembled as they explored her surroundings, knocking over a cup that shattered on impact. Tears streamed down her face as the terrible truth settled over her like a burial shroud. Thaddeus's rage had taken her sight. For 3 days, Hazel survived on instinct and memory. She drank water by dipping her fingers into cups to avoid overflow. She ate stale bread found in the bread box, rationing it carefully. Each hour was an eternity of darkness as she waited for Thaddeus to return, alternating between fear of his presence and fear of being abandoned. On the 4th morning, though morning and night had become indistinguishable in her perpetual darkness, Hazel heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart raced with dread as she pressed herself against the wall beside the door. The knock that came was not Thaddeus's impatient pounding, but something gentler, more hesitant. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson." A man's voice, unfamiliar and deep, called through the wood. "Sheriff sent me to check on you. Folks in town are worried." Hazel's fingers fumbled with the latch. When the door swung open, she remained in darkness. "Mrs. Thompson." The voice came again, closer now. "Good Lord, you're hurt." "I can't see," Hazel whispered, her voice cracking from disuse. "Please, who are you?" "Yates Vance, madam. I work at the Broken Spur Ranch east of town." His voice softened. "What happened to you, my husband?" she said, the words barely audible. We had a fight. He hasn't come back." Hazel felt gentle hands guiding her to a chair. "I'm going to fetch the doctor, Mrs. Thompson. You need help." "No." She grabbed at the air, catching what felt like a leather vest. "Please don't leave me alone. I can't see anything." A pause followed, then the sound of a chair scraping across the floor as he sat near her. "All right. Let me clean those wounds first, then I'll take you to the doctor myself." His voice was steady, calming, nothing like Thaddeus's sharp tones. As Yates gently washed the dried blood from her face, Hazel learned he had been sent by Sheriff Mills after Thaddeus was spotted 3 towns over, gambling and drinking heavily. "Your eyes don't look damaged," Yates said cautiously as he finished cleaning her wounds. "Dr. Jenkins might be able to help. Sometimes. Sometimes when a person takes a hard blow to the head, the sight goes away but can return." Hope flickered in Hazel's chest for the first time in days. "You truly think so?" "I've seen stranger things," he replied, and she could hear a smile in his voice. "Let me help you pack a few things. You can't stay here alone." An hour later, Hazel found herself seated before Yates on his horse, his steady arms around her waist as they rode toward town. The rhythm of the horse's gait and the warmth of the spring sun on her face gave her an unexpected sense of peace despite the darkness. "How did you come to work at the Broken Spur?" she asked, desperate to focus on something other than her blindness. "Came west from Missouri 5 years ago," Yates replied. "Started as a ranch hand, worked my way up to foreman last year. Owner's getting on in years, trusts me to handle most things now." "You must be good with the animals." He chuckled, the sound vibrating against her back. "Better with horses than people, my mother always said. Quieter, too." The doctor's verdict came as both relief and despair. "The blindness is likely temporary," Dr. Jenkins told Hazel as he examined her. "The blow has caused swelling that's pressing on the nerves to your eyes. With time and rest, your sight may return, but I can't promise when or if it will return completely." "What am I to do?" Hazel asked, clutching the edge of the examination table. "I can't go back home, not like this." "There's a room above my shop," came Yates's voice from the corner. "It's small but clean. You could stay there while you recover." "Mr. Vance," the doctor began, "that's very generous, but a woman alone, my sister can come stay with her," Yates interrupted. "She's visiting from Carson City. Would be good to have another woman around anyway." And so Hazel found herself in a strange room above the general store. Her world shrunk to the dimensions she could measure with her outstretched arms. Yates's sister, Lillian, arrived the following day, a cheerful, practical woman whose voice instantly put Hazel at ease. "My brother's always bringing home strays," Lillian said as she helped Hazel unpack the few belongings Yates had gathered from her cabin. "Usually 4-legged ones, though. This is a nice change." "I'm sorry to be a burden," Hazel replied, fighting back tears. "Nonsense. You're not a burden. You're a person who needs help. There's a difference." Lillian's hand found Hazel's, squeezing gently. "And from what Yates tells me, you've been carrying burdens alone for far too long." Days turned to weeks as Hazel slowly adjusted to navigating in darkness. Lillian taught her to count steps between furniture, to organize her belongings in specific places, to pour water by feeling the temperature change on her finger as the cup filled. Yates visited daily, often bringing small gifts: a sweet orange from the mercantile, a wooden comb he'd carved himself, fresh wildflowers that he described in such detail Hazel could almost see their colors. One evening, as they sat on the small porch outside her room, Hazel worked up the courage to ask the question that had been weighing on her. "Has anyone heard from Thaddeus?" Yates was silent for a long moment. "Sheriff got word he's working at a silver mine near Virginia City. Doesn't sound like he's planning to return." Relief and abandonment warred within her chest. "I should feel more upset that my husband has left me." "Some losses aren't losses at all," Yates said quietly. "Some are just the clearing of ground so something better can grow." A month into her stay, Hazel woke one morning to a faint glow at the edges of her vision. She blinked rapidly, afraid it would disappear, but the glow remained a hazy, indistinct light that was nonetheless more than the absolute darkness she had known. "Lillian," she called, her voice trembling with excitement. "Lillian, I can see something." The news spread quickly through the small community. Dr. Jenkins confirmed her sight was indeed returning, though it might take weeks or months to fully recover. Sheriff Mills visited to inform her that he'd written to Thaddeus demanding his return to answer for his actions, but had received no response. "The law can force a man to face justice, Mrs. Thompson," the sheriff said, "but it can't force him to be a decent husband. You might want to consider your options." That evening, when Yates came to visit, Hazel told him of the sheriff's words. They sat in comfortable silence as the sunset painted shadows on the wall that Hazel could just barely perceive. "Thaddeus was kind once," she said finally. "At least I thought he was, but I was young, just 19 when we married. Perhaps I saw what I wanted to see." "Some men aren't meant for the hardships of frontier life," Yates replied. "It breaks them in ways that can't be mended." "And you?" Hazel asked. "Has it broken you, not broken?" "Shaped, maybe." She heard the creak of his chair as he leaned forward. "The West demands much, but it gives much too: freedom, purpose, a chance to build something that's truly your own." "I thought I was building something with Thaddeus," Hazel said, bitterness creeping into her voice. "All I got was 7 years of disappointment and these scars." Yates's hand found hers in the dimness, his calloused palm warm against her fingers. "Not all men are like him, Hazel. Some of us still remember how to be gentle." The unexpected touch of his hand sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. For the first time since losing her sight, Hazel felt not just safe, but seen. As her vision gradually returned over the following weeks, Hazel's world expanded once more. Shapes became clearer, though details remained frustratingly blurry. Yates took to walking with her in the early mornings before his work at the ranch, helping her relearn the geography of Willow Creek. "The general store is 20 paces ahead," he would say, his arm linked with hers. "You'll know it by the red awning and the barrel of apples by the door." Hazel strained to see these landmarks, making mental notes of what her impaired vision could distinguish. "I think I can see the awning. It looks like a dark smudge." "That's it," Yates encouraged. "Your eyes are getting stronger every day." During one such walk, they encountered Mrs. Hollister, the banker's wife, whose pinched expression Hazel could just make out as they approached. "Mrs. Thompson," the woman said with forced politeness, "I see you're recovering. How fortunate to have such attentive friends during your husband's absence." The emphasis on friends carried an unmistakable insinuation that made Hazel's cheeks flush. Before she could respond, Yates stepped slightly forward. "Mrs. Hollister, it's a fine Christian act to care for those in need," he said, his tone respectful but firm. "I'm sure you agree," the older woman sniffed. "Of course, though one wonders what Mr. Thompson would think of these arrangements." "I imagine he'd have thoughts on the matter," Yates replied evenly, "if he hadn't left his injured wife to fend for herself after causing her blindness." Mrs. Hollister's mouth opened in shock, but no words emerged. With a hurried goodbye, she continued on her way, glancing back over her shoulder as she went. "You shouldn't have said that," Hazel murmured once the woman was out of earshot. "People will talk even more now." "People always talk," Yates said with a shrug she could feel through his arm. "Doesn't make what they say true or important." "It's different for a woman," Hazel insisted. "My reputation, your reputation," Yates interrupted gently, "should be that of a brave woman who survived something terrible and is rebuilding her life with dignity. Anyone who sees differently isn't worth fretting over." His defense warmed her, but the encounter left Hazel unsettled. In the eyes of the town and the law, she was still Thaddeus Thompson's wife, regardless of his abandonment. Her future remained as uncertain as her vision. That afternoon, a letter arrived from the sheriff of Virginia City. Lillian read it aloud to Hazel, her voice growing quiet as she reached the final paragraph. They found Thaddeus Thompson dead at the bottom of a mine shaft 3 days ago, Lillian read. The other miners report he had been drinking heavily and wandered into a restricted area. The sheriff extends his condolences and inquires about arrangements for the body. Hazel sat stunned, emotions churning within her like a flash flood: grief for the man she had once loved, relief that she would never again fear his return, guilt for feeling that relief, and beneath it all, a strange sense of freedom that made her dizzy. "I should feel more sorrow," she whispered, pressing her hands to her face. "You're feeling exactly what you should," Lillian assured her, sitting beside Hazel and taking her hand. "There's no right way to respond to news like this." When Yates learned of Thaddeus's death, he came immediately to the room above the general store, concern evident in his voice. "What do you need, Hazel? Just tell me and it's done." What she needed, Hazel realized, was time to process the abrupt end of her marriage, time for her eyes to heal fully, time to consider what shape her life might take now that she was neither wife nor exactly widow, but something in between. In the weeks that followed, as summer gave way to autumn, Hazel found herself drawn more deeply into the daily rhythms of the Broken Spur Ranch. With her vision improving enough to distinguish shapes and movement, if not fine details, Yates had suggested she might help with some of the lighter work around the ranch house. "Mrs. Carver's arthritis is making it hard for her to manage alone," he explained, referring to the elderly housekeeper. "She could use another pair of hands, and it might do you good to have purpose each day." The ranch sprawled across a valley 20 minutes' ride from town. Its main house, a substantial 2-story structure of timber and stone that housed not only the aging owner, Franklin Reed, but also served as the administrative heart of the operation. Yates lived in a smaller cabin nearby, close enough to respond to any emergency but separate enough to maintain his privacy. Mrs. Carver, a widow in her 60s with a brisk manner and surprisingly strong arms, took Hazel under her wing immediately. "Don't need perfect eyes to need bread or men's shirts," she declared. "Just follow my voice and those hands of yours will learn the rest." For the first time since losing her sight, Hazel found herself treated not as an invalid to be pitied, but as a capable woman temporarily inconvenienced. It was liberating to be useful again, to have her days structured by tasks that needed doing rather than by the limitations of her condition. Mr. Reed, the ranch owner, was a gruff but fair man in his 70s who had built the Broken Spur from nothing after coming west during the gold rush. His health was failing, and he rarely left the house anymore, spending most days in his study poring over ledgers and correspondence with the aid of a magnifying glass. "Vance says you've got grit, Mrs. Thompson," Reed told her one afternoon when she brought him tea. "Says you never complain, even on your worst days. I respect that." "Mr. Vance has been very kind," Hazel replied, carefully setting down the tray where she knew the desk to be. "Everyone here has." Reed made a noise that might have been a laugh. "Vance isn't kind to everyone, make no mistake. Man's particular about who gets his consideration." She could hear the old man shifting in his chair. "But he sees something in you, something worth protecting." The words stayed with Hazel as autumn deepened. Yates remained unfailingly supportive, teaching her to ride again despite her limited vision, showing her how to identify the sounds and smells of the ranch so she could navigate independently. His patience never wavered, nor did the quiet respect with which he treated her. Yet there was something else growing between them, something neither acknowledged but both felt. It showed in the way Yates's hand lingered when helping her mount a horse, in how Hazel found reasons to bring him coffee when he worked late in the ranch office, In the long conversations they shared on the porch of his cabin as twilight settled over the valley. "Did you ever want a family of your own?" Hazel asked him one such evening, the question slipping out before she could reconsider it. Yates was silent so long she feared she had offended him. Finally, he sighed. "Once. There was a girl back in Missouri. We had plans." "What happened?" "Her father had different plans. A banker's daughter doesn't marry a poor farmer's son, no matter what promises they've made each other." The bitterness in his voice was old but still present. "She married a lawyer from St. Louis, has 3 children now, last I heard." "I'm sorry," Hazel said softly. "It was a lifetime ago." The wooden porch swing creaked as he shifted. "What about you? You and Thaddeus never had children." Hazel's throat tightened. "We tried. For years. After the 3rd miscarriage, Thaddeus started drinking more. Said a man needed sons to make his mark on the world." "Some marks are better not made," Yates said quietly. The conversation might have ended there, but something compelled Hazel to continue. "The doctor in Carson City told me there was nothing wrong with me. That I could still have children someday with the right circumstances." She could feel Yates's gaze on her in the darkness. That must have been a comfort to hear. It was. And it wasn't. Hazel's hands twisted in her lap. "It made Thaddeus's cruelty harder to bear, knowing the fault wasn't mine. And it made me dream of a different life, which felt like betrayal." "It's not betrayal to imagine yourself happy, Hazel." Yates's voice was closer now, and she realized he had moved to sit beside her on the swing. "Every living thing reaches for light and nourishment. It's the most natural instinct there is." The brush of his fingers against hers sent a current through her body. For a breathless moment, Hazel thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stood abruptly. "It's getting late. I should take you back to town." The ride to Willow Creek passed in silence, but it was a silence filled with unspoken possibilities that both thrilled and terrified her. As winter approached, bringing with it the first dusting of snow to the Nevada mountains, Hazel's vision continued to improve. Colors were more vivid, shapes more defined. She could distinguish faces now, read large print if she held it close to her eyes, and navigate familiar spaces without assistance. Dr. Jenkins was cautiously optimistic that she would regain most, if not all, of her sight in time. "You're a testament to resilience, Mrs. Thompson," the doctor told her during a checkup. "Many would have given up after such an injury." "I had help," Hazel replied simply. "I wasn't allowed to give up." That evening, as Hazel prepared for bed in her room above the general store, a commotion in the street below drew her to the window. Squinting into the darkness, she could make out a group of men on horseback gathered outside the saloon. Their voices carried up to her loud, angry and frightened. "Whole herd scattered across 3 counties," one man was saying. "Fence cut clean through in a dozen places." "Has to be the work of that Delaney gang," another replied. "Same as hit the Williamson place last month." Hazel strained to see better. Among the riders, she recognized Yates's tall figure astride his distinctive buckskin gelding. Even from a distance, she could tell by the set of his shoulders that something was terribly wrong. The next morning brought news that made her blood run cold. The Broken Spur had been raided, overnight cattle stampeded, a barn burned, and one of the ranch hands shot dead while trying to defend the property. The Delaney gang, a notorious group of rustlers who had been terrorizing the territory for months, had struck again with devastating effect. Hazel hurried to the ranch as soon as she heard, arriving to find chaos and grief. Cowboys worked to round up scattered cattle while others extinguished the last embers of the smoldering barn. Near the main house, a sheet-covered form laid on a wagon bed young Jamie Collins, barely 20 years old, who had worked at the Broken Spur for less than a year. She found Yates in the ranch office, his face smudged with soot and grim with exhaustion as he spoke with Sheriff Mills. When he saw Hazel in the doorway, something in his expression shifted. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough. "It's not safe." "I came to help," Hazel replied, stepping into the room. "Mrs. Carver will need assistance with meals for the men, and Jamie's body will need preparing." Sheriff Mills nodded respectfully to Hazel before turning back to Yates. "I'll send telegraphs to the neighboring counties, but you know as well as I do that the Delaney's could be halfway to California by now. Or planning their next hit," Yates said grimly. "They're getting bolder, Sheriff. This isn't just about cattle anymore. They killed Jamie in cold blood." After the sheriff left, Yates slumped into a chair, the weight of the night's events visible in every line of his body. Without thinking, Hazel moved behind him, placing her hands on his tense shoulders. "You need rest," she said softly. "You can't help anyone if you collapse." "I can't rest while those men are free," he replied, but he didn't pull away from her touch. "Jamie was under my protection, they all are. And who protects you, Yates?" Her fingers worked at the knots in his shoulders, feeling him gradually yield to her ministrations. "You can't carry this burden alone." He reached up, catching one of her hands and holding it against his chest. Through his shirt, Hazel could feel the steady beat of his heart. "Having you here," he said quietly, "makes the burden lighter." In that moment, something shifted between them, a boundary crossed that could not be re-established. Hazel knew she should pull away, maintain the proper distance that her ambiguous status as neither wife nor widow demanded. Instead, she leaned down and pressed her cheek against the top of his head, offering comfort in the only way she knew how. The following days brought more tension as news of the raid spread throughout the territory. The Broken Spur wasn't the only ranch targeted. Two smaller operations to the north had also been hit, though with less violence. Franklin Raid, aged by grief and worry, suffered a minor stroke that left him bedridden and more dependent than ever on Yates to manage the ranch's affairs. "We can't let them win," Reed insisted from his sick, his voice weaker but his determination unchanged. "This ranch is my legacy. I won't see it destroyed by thieves and murderers." Yates organized the ranch hands into armed patrols, working with neighboring ranchers to create a network of lookouts and messengers. The sheriff deputized several reliable men, including Yates, giving them the authority to defend not just their property but the entire community. Through it all, Hazel remained at the ranch, moving her few belongings from the room above the general store into a small chamber off the kitchen. Mrs. Carver welcomed the help, and no one questioned the propriety of the arrangement given the emergency circumstances. One evening, as Hazel and Yates walked the perimeter of the ranch house checking that all was secure before nightfall, he broke their comfortable silence with a question. "Have you thought about what you'll do when this is over? When your sight is fully returned?" The question caught her off guard. "I haven't had much chance to think beyond each day's needs lately." "You could go anywhere," Yates continued, his voice carefully neutral. "Start fresh where no one knows your past." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air settled over Hazel. "Are you suggesting I should leave?" "No." Yates stopped walking, turning to face her. In the fading light, she could just make out the intensity of his expression. "I'm asking if you want to." "Why would I want to leave?" Hazel asked, her heart beating faster. "Everything I care about is here." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Hazel, I have no right to ask anything of you. Your husband's been gone less than 6 months. You're still healing. But I need you to know," a shot rang out from the direction of the south pasture, cutting off his words. Instantly, Yates pushed Hazel behind him, drawing the revolver from his belt. "Get inside," he ordered, All tenderness vanished from his voice. "Lock the doors and stay away from the windows." Before she could protest, he was running toward the sound of gunfire, calling for the other ranch hands. Hazel hurried to the house, fear clutching at her throat. Through the gathering darkness, she could see the flash of more gunshots and hear men shouting. The Delaney gang had returned. The next hour passed in a blur of terror and confusion. Mrs. Carver and Hazel barricaded themselves in the main house with Mr. Reed, listening to the firefight raging outside. Occasionally, a wounded ranch hand would stagger to the door seeking shelter and medical attention, bringing fragments of news about the battle. "They came from the creek bed," gasped one young cowboy as Hazel bandaged a bullet graze on his arm. "At least a dozen of them. Vance has them pinned down by the old corral, but they've got us outnumbered." Just as the words left his mouth, a thunderous crash shook the house, the sound of the front door being kicked in. Mrs. Carver screamed as 3 men burst into the parlor, their faces concealed by bandanas, guns drawn. "Well, well," said the tallest of the intruders, his eyes cold above his mask. "Looks like we found ourselves some hostages, boys." Hazel stood slowly, positioning herself between the gunmen and Mrs. Carver. Her impaired vision made the men before her appear as menacing shadows, but she forced steel into her voice. "What do you want, smart woman?" the leader replied with a chuckle. "We want safe passage out of here, and we figure the foreman won't risk shooting if we've got his woman with us." A chill ran through Hazel at his words. They knew about her relationship with Yates, whatever that relationship might be. "I'm not his woman." "Could have fooled us," another of the men sneered. "Word gets around, lady. Now move unless you want the old woman to catch a bullet." With no choice, Hazel allowed herself to be roughly guided toward the door, one of the men keeping a tight grip on her arm while the others covered their retreat. As they emerged onto the porch, the gunfire around the property ceased abruptly. "Vance," the leader shouted into the darkness. "We've got your woman. Show yourself or she dies." For a moment, silence gripped the ranch. Then Yates's voice came from somewhere to the right of the house. "Let her go, Delaney. This is between us." "Throw down your weapons," Delaney demanded. "All of you. Or I put a bullet in her pretty head right now." "Don't do it, Yates," Hazel called out, earning herself a painful twist of her arm. "Shut up," Delaney hissed, pressing his gun barrel against her temple. "One more word and it's over." Time seemed to slow as Hazel stood trembling on the porch, the cold metal of the revolver against her skin focusing her mind with terrible clarity. She hadn't survived Thaddeus's cruelty and months of blindness, only to die now, used as a pawn in a battle between men. And she couldn't bear the thought of Yates risking his life to save hers. With a sudden, desperate movement, Hazel drove her elbow backward into Delaney's stomach. The outlaw grunted in surprise, his grip loosening just enough for her to twist away. As she did, gunfire erupted again, but from a new direction. The sheriff and his deputies had arrived, surrounding the house and catching the Delaney gang in a crossfire. Chaos engulfed the porch. Hazel felt herself being tackled to the ground as bullets whizzed overhead. For one terrifying moment, she thought Delaney had caught her, but the arms around her were familiar, protective rather than threatening. "Stay down," Yates whispered, his body shielding hers as the gunfight intensified around them. It was over in minutes. 2 of the gang members lay dead on the porch. The rest, including Delaney himself, were captured by the sheriff's men. As the shooting subsided, Yates helped Hazel to her feet, his hands gentle as he checked her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough with emotion. "Did they harm you?" "No," Hazel assured him, though her entire body trembled with the aftermath of fear. "I'm unharmed." Yates pulled her against him then, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt his heart pounding against hers, his breath uneven as he pressed his face into her hair. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured, the words meant for her alone. Hazel's arms wound around his waist, clinging to his solid presence. "You didn't. I'm right here." Later, after the sheriff had taken the prisoners away and the wounded had been tended to, Hazel and Yates sat together on the porch of his cabin. The ranch had settled into an uneasy quiet, the night air crisp with approaching winter. "You could have been killed," Yates said, breaking a long silence, "when I saw them bring you out of the house." "I was terrified," Hazel admitted. "Not of dying exactly, but of leaving things unsaid between us." He turned to her then, taking her hands in his. Even with her impaired vision, Hazel could see the intensity in his gaze. "What things?" "That you saved me long before tonight," she said softly. "Not just from blindness or abandonment. You showed me that gentleness can exist without weakness. That kindness isn't something to be suspicious of." Yates's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Hazel, I've wanted to tell you for months now. I've fallen in love with you, but your situation, the timing, it never seemed right to speak of it." "And now?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Now I've nearly lost you once, and I won't risk losing you again without you knowing the truth." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "I love you, Hazel Thompson. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." Tears blurred what little vision Hazel had regained. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since that first day when you cleaned my wounds and spoke to me with such kindness." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question asked and answered in the meeting of lips and the shared breath between them. When they pulled apart, Hazel felt as though she was truly seeing Yates for the first time, her heart recognizing what her eyes were still learning to distinguish. "What happens now?" she asked, leaning her forehead against his. "Now we take time," Yates replied. "Time for your eyes to heal completely. Time for the town gossips to find something else to talk about. Time for you to be certain this is what you want." "I am certain," Hazel insisted, "more certain than I've ever been of anything." He smiled, and even through her impaired vision, she could see the love in his expression. "Then we'll wait only as long as propriety demands. No longer." Spring came early to Willow Creek that year, bringing with it not only the rebirth of the land but the renewal of Hazel's sight as well. By April, Dr. Jenkins declared her recovery remarkable, while she would always have some minor vision impairments, particularly in her peripheral vision and in low light. She could now read, and recognize faces with little difficulty. Franklin Reed recovered from his stroke as well, though the ordeal left him more determined than ever to secure the future of his beloved ranch. In late May, he called Hazel and Yates to his study, his weathered face solemn as they seated themselves before his desk. "I've been watching you too," the old rancher said without preamble, "seeing how you work together, how you look at each other when you think no one's noticing." Hazel felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Yates met his employer's gaze steadily. "We haven't tried to hide our feelings, Mr. Reed, but we've been discreet out of respect for you and the ranch." Reed waved a hand dismissively. "I'm not some prudish Easterner, Vance. I've known since winter that you two were meant for each other." He leaned forward, fixing them with a penetrating stare. "What I want to know is, what are your plans?" Yates glanced at Hazel before answering. "We intend to marry, sir, as soon as it's appropriate given the circumstances of Hazel's widowhood." "Good," Reed nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Because I've made a decision about the ranch. I'm getting too old to run this place, even with your help, Vance. I have no children to leave it to. So I'm offering you a partnership now, with the understanding that upon my death, the broken spur passes to you both." Stunned silence greeted his words. Hazel looked to Yates, whose expression reflected her own disbelief. "Mr. Reid," Yates finally managed, "that's incredibly generous, but it's not charity," Reid interrupted gruffly. "It's good business. You know this land better than anyone, Vance. You've practically been running things for years anyway. And Mrs. Thompson has proven herself a capable manager of the household since she arrived." He smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. "Besides, this place needs children running around it again. Has for a long time." Hazel felt tears well up, overwhelmed by the man's generosity and the future he was offering them. "We don't know what to say, Mr. Reid." "Say yes," the old rancher replied simply. "And then go get married before the gossips wear themselves out completely." And so, on a perfect June morning, with wildflowers dotting the hills and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage, Hazel and Yates exchanged vows beneath an arch of twisted willow branches on the Broken Spur Ranch. The entire community gathered to witness their union, even Mrs. Hollister, whose initial disapproval had softened in the face of what was clearly genuine love. As Hazel spoke her promises, she could see Yates's face clearly, every detail of his expression visible to her now healed eyes. The joy she found there mirrored her own, a happiness neither had dared hope for a year earlier. "I never thought I'd find love again," she told him that night as they lay together in what was now their home. The foreman's cabin expanded and improved over the previous months. "I never thought I deserved it." "Everyone deserves love, Hazel," Yates murmured, drawing her closer. "Some just have a harder path finding it." The years that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. Franklin Reid lived another 5 years, long enough to bounce Hazel and Yates's first child, a son they named Franklin James Vance, on his knee, and tell him stories of the early days of the Broken Spur. When the old rancher finally passed peacefully in his sleep, he did so secure in the knowledge that his legacy would continue. Hazel's vision remained mostly restored, though she always took care in dim light and kept her surroundings ordered in ways that accommodated the occasional blurring or blind spots that persisted. These minor impairments seemed a small price to pay for the life she had found, a life filled with purpose, respect, and a love that grew stronger with each passing season. By the time their second child, a daughter named Sarah, arrived 2 years after their son, the Broken Spur had become one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Yates's innovative breeding programs and Hazel's careful management of the ranch's finances ensured prosperity even in difficult years. Occasionally, news would reach them of the Delaney gang, those who had survived the shootout serving long sentences in territorial prison, or of distant acquaintances who had known Thaddeus. But these echoes from the past grew fainter with time, overshadowed by the vibrant present Hazel and Yates had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they watched their children playing beneath the same willow arch where they had exchanged vows, Yates took Hazel's hand in his. "Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have turned out?" he asked, his voice thoughtful. "If I hadn't been sent to check on you that day." Hazel considered the question, remembering the darkness that had once been her world, not just the physical blindness, but the spiritual and emotional shadows that had enveloped her during her years with Thaddeus. "I believe we would have found each other somehow," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Even in my darkest moments I was reaching for light, and you were that light, Yates. You still are." He pressed a kiss to her temple, right over the faint scar that remained from Thaddeus's final blow, a mark that had once represented pain, but now served as a reminder of how far she had come, of the strength she had discovered within herself. "You saved me too, you know," Yates murmured against her skin. I was just existing before you, going through the motions, building something for someone else's legacy. You gave me a reason to build for our future instead." As twilight settled over the Broken Spur Ranch, Hazel gazed out at the land that had become truly theirs, the rolling pastures where cattle grazed, the sturdy barns and outbuildings, the vegetable garden and orchard she had planted, the home they had created not just for themselves but for their children and the ranch hands who had become like family. From the darkness of that terrible night when Thaddeus's rage had taken her sight, Hazel had emerged into a world more beautiful than she could have imagined, not despite her journey through blindness, but because of it. For in that darkness, she had learned to see with her heart, to recognize genuine kindness, to value gentleness, and to believe herself worthy of love. And Yates, the quiet cowboy who had guided her into this gentler world, remained by her side, his hand steady in hers, his love unwavering, as they continued to build their life together in the shadow of the mountains, beneath the vast Nevada sky.